What is going on, Peep Squad? My name is Luke, and in this video I will be ranking all of the movies I've seen in 2021. I've seen quite a lot of movies this year, just because there was a lot of movies released, and I just was going to the movies more often than I had been before. Also, there was a lot of stuff on streaming too that has been released, and so, yeah, I'm ranking all of them. I've seen 26 movies in the past year, and I'm ranking them. And now the only criteria that I'm going to be ranking is how much I enjoyed it on. I know some people will rank it on like, oh, it was written well, or this direction, or whatever, cinematography, all that. I appreciate those things, but at the end of the day, it's just how much I enjoyed it. That's the only criteria. And I'm saying that because there are some movies that weren't necessarily made well, that are pretty high up, because I just had such a good time watching them. And so that, with that out of the way, let's hop into it. Number 26 on my list, the very worst movie of 2021, in my opinion, was Home Sweet Home Alone. And so I think when this movie was announced, they were going to reboot Home Alone. A lot of people were talking about how it was probably gonna be bad, and they were right. My issue with this is that it's an interesting concept. On paper, it's a very interesting concept for this movie. It's basically told primarily from the burglar's perspective. That sounds interesting. Something we haven't seen in Home Alone before, and also the cast is pretty darn good. A lot of these actors are in a lot of other movies. For example, the main kid was in Jojo Rabbit. I love that movie. So yeah, it's a good, on paper it's a good concept, and the acting is good. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work because they have to adhere to a lot of the staples of the franchise. So a lot of the movies told from the burglar's perspective, like I mentioned, but they cut back to the kid so we can see him eating all the candy and going on the computer and playing video games and going to church, like all those things that we've come to know from Home Alone. And so it's just, those moments are very jarring. And then on top of all that, you have the ending where they break into the kid's house, but the perspective shifts. So we're no longer supposed to be rooting for the bad guys. We're supposed to be rooting for the kid. Unfortunately, for the entire movie leading up to that point, it was the other way around. So it doesn't really make any sense. Like, I think this movie would have been quite a bit better if it was not attached to Home Alone at all. Instead, we just had a movie about these burglars who had to steal something back that was very valuable to them, and they broke into a house. Unfortunately, the person living there was a psychopath and set up a bunch of traps. I think that could make a cool movie. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work in this context. Number 25 is Mortal Kombat. Now, when this movie came out, I saw this and the original one. I believe 94 is when the original movie came out. I saw these back to back without any knowledge of the franchise. I haven't played any of the video games, haven't read any of the comics, something like that. And just on this comparing these two movies, I was like, I love the first one quite a lot more than I love this one. And then after that, I went and I played some of the original games. I played the first 3 games now, and I have to say, aside from the gore that this movie has, I think that the original 94 movie is a better representation of the source material. I feel like there's an inherent silliness that comes with Mortal Kombat, and that doesn't mean it is a very dark, bloody video game, but at the same time, it's very, very ridiculous. So I think the original movie captures that a lot more than this movie. This movie's way too serious. All of the characters are unlikable. They act like robots. There's no reason. I'm not really given anything that I can like relate to with any of these characters. And so I feel like the only thing this movie has going for it is the gore and the violence, and unfortunately, a lot of it's CGI. So I mean, this movie just isn't appealing to me as just a regular moviegoer, and it's also not appealing to me as someone who's somewhat familiar with the Mortal Kombat franchise. I just finished recording and I realized I didn't talk about Black Widow, so I'm going to cut this into wherever the appropriate place is in the movie. I think it's 24, but I'm not really sure. So, Black Widow. This was probably one of the most boring movies I've seen all year. honestly. Like, it's a shame because I saw this after I saw Hawkeye, and Florence Pugh does a really good job in Hawkeye, and so I was looking forward to her performance in this, but it was just so boring and bland. And like, there's a lot of plot holes that I could get into, and like, what is this? Doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. I'm not, because this movie is so boring. It Marvel had a really interesting year when you compare the four movies that came out. Two that are quite good and two that are like among the worst in my opinion of the entire MCU. Um, but regardless, it's just I expected quite a lot more from the MCU, and unfortunately, that's not what we got. So that's the end of that. Number 23 is Spiral, and so I think that this came as a surprise to me, but I was thinking about this earlier, that I think I've seen all of the Saw movies, and most of them I enjoy quite a bit. I mean, they're not perfect, but they're kind of a, it's a fun little movie, fun little jaunt. Um, so I was kind of looking forward to Spiral, but this movie somehow managed to make the concept of Saw boring. Like, it's baffling to me how they managed to pull that off. I would have rather had a Jigsaw 2 than whatever this is. Um, I mean, it's more like a David Fincher kind of mystery than it is a Saw movie. It's I think the biggest problem that I have with this movie is that it kind of puts the traps on the back burner. So a lot of the movies, well, all the movies leading for this one, they have like two stories going on. They have these people are put in traps and they have to survive, and there's also the detectives trying to figure out the mystery of it all. And so, out of those two, in the 8 movies that preceded this one, the more interesting story was obviously the people in the traps. But this movie, there is not really a plot line about people in traps. It's just entirely the cops, and occasionally it will cut to a person in a trap. But that's few and far between. I feel like it's just movies that doesn't work as a Saw movie. I feel like it could have been a good mystery if it was done by somebody else who is more prolific in that genre. But all in all, I felt like this was just a boring movie. Speaking of boring movies, number 22, we have The Eternals. With the same with Mortal Kombat, it's like these characters are just so boring and so unlikable. It's like that. I'm not given any reason to connect with any of these people or relate with any of these characters, and it's just like add to all of this that it's one of the longest MCU movies, and it's just like I don't know, man. It's a boring movie. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. Nah. Number 21 is Free Guy, and so I did enjoy this movie. Like, there's a bit of a gap between Eternals and Free Guy. My problem with Free Guy is that I think it's a just surface level fluff. Like, there's nothing substantial about this movie. It's just surface level enjoyment. It has a lot of meta textual references, and I feel like at this point I'm kind of done with the meta movies. I feel like I could just go back to watching a regular movie at this point. I don't really need a movie to reference a bunch of other movies that it feels like a lot of this time it's like, oh, you like Star Wars? Here's a Star Wars. You like Captain America? There's Captain America. It's like I would have liked, something deeper than that. Additionally, the story is basically just the Lego movie. So yeah, there is some surface level enjoyment to be had with this film. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot else there. Number 20 is probably the most disappointing movie of the year. Like, I was actually looking forward to this one, the French Dispatch. Now, I'm actually kind of a big fan of Wes Anderson. I like his weird style. I even like the weird stop motion Fox movie. But I feel like this movie is it's too out there. It's just too weird. This word gets thrown around a lot, but I think that this movie is almost too pretentious in a way. It's just very weird. This movie tells like 3 or 4 different stories, and There's nothing wrong with that. It's like there's little vignettes like the Twilight Zone or something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. My problem is that it's just all over the place. Like, for example, there's a shot. Most of this movie is in black and white, which is fine. Again, I don't have an issue with that. But there was a shot that was in black and white. It was from the top down. It was two people laying down, and then they were talking, and then it cuts to the opposite angle, and the aspect ratio changes, and then it's in color for a couple of seconds, then it cuts back to what it was, black and white, with the letterbox ratio. It's so bizarre. Like, I don't understand what the reasoning to that was. I don't understand what's going on here. And then there was a whole scene that was relayed to the audience via like a comic book panel, and that was very bizarre too, because there's nothing to justify that. It doesn't really add anything to the movie. It's just very, very weird. Yeah, I wanted to enjoy this movie quite a lot because I do enjoy Wes Anderson's style. I enjoy his sense of humor, but this movie is just too out there for me, man. Number 19 is Luca. Now I can say that I appreciate the craftsmanship of this movie, the storytelling, the animation, but it's just not really for me. This cutesy, feel good, Disney is not really my thing. Much like with Free Guy, it's just kind of like, in my mind, it's just like this surface level kind of enjoyment. There's nothing else to really talk about with this movie. It's just kind of a fun little thing you can watch with your family, and there's not a whole lot else going on. Number 18 is Wrong Turn. Now this movie is quite interesting because the first 45 minutes of this movie are really bad. Like, it's really, really bad. But then the rest of this movie is actually quite good. And so I'm very conflicted because almost half of this movie is not good. And then it twists around. There's a twist around halfway through the movie, and it's like, oh, this is the movie. This is really good. But there's 45 minutes of setup, and that's all very not good. So that's why it's so low on this list, I think, is because it's just bad up until it gets really good. And I wish you could, maybe you could. Maybe you could have a fan edit where you just cut out a lot of that early stuff. I'm not sure how that would affect the rest of the movie. I'm not very good at editing, so I'm not the person to talk to about that. But it'll be interesting to see how that is. And again, I haven't seen any of the earlier Wrong Turn movies, so a lot of the fans of the franchise felt like this was too much of a deviation. So I wouldn't know anything about that, but on its own, it ends really cool. Like, everything after that first 45 minutes are really interesting. But it's just, I don't know how to explain it without getting into spoilers, but yeah, I'm very conflicted about this movie. It would have been a lot higher if the first 45 minutes were as good as the second half. Number 17 is Belfast. Now, this is another movie that was entirely black and white, which I don't have an issue with. My issue with this movie is that it's very hard to follow because it's told from the perspective of a child, so I think that's maybe intentional. I think, but they lean too far into that. Acting and the characters are very, very good. I really enjoy it, but it's just kind of hard to follow, hard to understand. Again, I think that's intentional, but I feel like they lean too much into that. It's a good movie with good actors. I don't think it deserves all of the nominations it's getting, but that's just my own opinion. And now on to the next one. Number 16 is The Electric Life of Louis Wayne. Now, this movie was on Amazon Prime. It had Benedict Cumberbatch in it, and he plays Louis Wayne. He's an artist who draws animals. Now, Benedict Cumberbatch is a really good actor, and for a lot of this movie, he kind of plays that kind of like Sherlock Holmes, sort of high-functioning kind of sociopath kind of character, and that's really fun to watch. But then towards the end of the movie, he starts like losing his mind and going insane, and I just don't think that those parts are done as well as the rest of the movie. And the weird thing is that he starts to go insane, but then he kind of relapses a little bit, and then it goes back and forth between that. Towards the end of the movie, it gets kind of psychedelic, which I think is fine in concept, but I feel like it's jarring when compared to the rest of the movie. Good performances. The story, I feel like goes on for a little too long. I don't think it needed to tell. I don't think it needed to tell this entire life. But yeah, I think Lewis Wayne was a real person who drew real pictures, so that's cool. But I feel like this movie was again a good concept, but it's poor execution, or not even poor execution, just kind of subpar execution on some points. Number 15. This one's really interesting. A Match Made at Christmas. So I actually know the people who made this movie, so there's a chance that they could be watching this video. It's hard to really look at this movie the same way I look at the other movies, because I don't have that connection with the people who made it, so I can criticize it a lot more. Like if I knew the guy who made Home Sweet Home Alone, I probably wouldn't have said the things, or wouldn't have been so hard on it as I would have been as I was. But yeah, this is for our first time directing a feature film. It could have been a lot worse. It was quite good. Again, I feel like this is just not for me. This Christmas rom-com's not really my thing. The only reason why I watched it is because I knew the people who made it. But yeah, I feel like the only criticism I would have is that it runs a little bit too long. I don't think that a lot of rom-coms are not really 2.5 hours long. But on top of that, I'm not sure, like, if you were to ask me what I would cut, I'm not really sure what I would, like, what parts I would trim. I just feel like overall it just runs a little bit too long. But again, kudos on making a movie. That's really cool. Yeah, let's move on to number 14, Cruella. This one, number 14, is Cruella. Cruella. That's another one that's hard to say. I was not expecting to like this one as much as I ended up liking it. I have very, very low expectations going into this movie, but it passed. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. The cinematography and just like the set design and the costuming and the lights and all the makeup and stuff was very cool. I enjoyed that a lot. I feel like these people tried way too hard for the movie that they were trying to make. Like, I feel like Disney just wanted to make a Cruella movie. They hired whoever they could, and these people were like, well, we're making a Disney movie. We have the budget. Let's just go all out and make this crazy movie. And I feel like it could have been, like, they could have tried a lot less. Because with these Disney live action remakes, the bar is quite low. And but these people, they did it, man. The cinematography is very cool. Like, there's a lot of really cool shots. Again, there's a scene where it was like there's like a rock concert, but there's also like a fashion show, and I was just like floored by it. I was impressed. It was wild. But I feel like it being a Disney movie, it kind of pulls its punches at some parts. And so I'm not saying like we need to make it our Cruella de Vil movie. That's not what I'm saying. But I feel like with Free Guy it was PG-13, and there's a couple, like, it's more mature than this movie, and I would have liked a little bit more maturity from it. But again, it's better than I thought it would be. The biggest criticism I have with this movie is the soundtrack. It's quite obnoxious. There's so much pop music, and unfortunately, I'll talk about this in a little bit. But when you use pop music in a movie, you have to use songs that are lesser known. Because, for example, in this movie, I'm watching it and they play the Rolling Stones. I was like, oh, I know this song. It takes me out of the experience. But we'll talk about movies that uses pop songs to their advantage, where it's like, this is not a song I'm familiar with, but because it has that 70s vibe to it, it kind of helps with the immersion of the time period or whatever you're trying to convey. And because this movie uses a lot of very popular songs that were in the 60s and 70s, it kind of gets a little annoying, like I mentioned earlier. And then moving on to number 13. This is Zack Snyder's Justice League. Again, I was not on the release the Snyder Cut bandwagon. So I didn't really know what to expect coming into this movie, but it was good. It was a good movie. I was impressed. And going back and watching a lot of other Zack Snyder movies, I feel like, yeah, he's a good director. Um, my problem with this is that this is it's a 4 hour long movie, and I think that if Zack Snyder was kept on the project and he's allowed to direct the movie all the way through because he had to step down because his daughter died. So they replaced him. So they replaced him with Joss Whedon, and that was the original movie we got. But I feel like if that hadn't happened, if Zack Snyder stayed on, the movie then would have not been the movie we got now, because the studio would have meant like, okay, you need to cut this, you need to do this differently. And so I feel like with this movie, it's everything stays in. We're keeping everything. Because a lot of the times, you just cut stuff for time. It's not all, necessary for the theatrical experience. You want to keep that as short as possible. You want to tell a connective story within less than 2.5 hours, generally speaking. And I feel like with this case, because it was streaming, because it was Zack Snyder was given free reign, he put everything into this movie. And so that's why we got what we got. That's why it's 4 hours long. Could have been a lot worse. I enjoyed it quite a bit. But I probably won't watch it anytime soon just because of how long it is. But yeah, number 12. This is another one that I had low expectations, but I was quite impressed by. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Now this movie is literally only 58 minutes long. It's barely even a movie. But I was impressed. Like, this movie, it understands what it's trying to do, and it accomplishes it perfectly. Like, it understands it's only a 58-minute movie based on a children's book that came out like 15 years ago or whatever. And it understands what it is. It understands how long it is. It executes it perfectly. Like, I don't want this movie to be any shorter or any longer than it is. It understands its runtime perfectly. It's quite charming, honestly. I believe it was written by the author of the series, and so it really captures the charm of those books. And I feel like this is a good way to introduce the young readers to this franchise. I haven't read one of these books in like 10 years, but I think he's still writing. I'm not sure. But I feel like, yeah, this is a good way to introduce your new series to new readers. Number 11, this is the only movie that I saw on TV this year, One December Night. It is a Hallmark movie starring Bruce Campbell. And I was a little bit interested to see, like, well, what's Bruce Campbell going to bring to a Hallmark movie? And so a lot of the tropes are there. A lot of the romance, a lot of the Christmas, Hallmark, that's all here, but it's put in the background. The focus of this movie is about Bruce Campbell. He plays an aged musician, not a magician, a musician. He plays an old musician, and he's trying to, he had a very public breakup with another musician years ago, and they're trying to kind of get them back together for one last tour. And that's kind of the focus of this movie. It has all the Hallmark tropes kind of in the background. There is a woman that falls in love with a man and all that stuff. But the focus of this movie is really on Bruce Campbell and his kind of music partner sort of thing. And I feel like it is a step up from a lot of the other movies on Hallmark. I feel like there's a lot of emotion. Bruce Campbell's acting really well, obviously. Yeah, he gets a lot to do with this movie. Honestly, you wouldn't expect that from a Hallmark movie, but there's a lot to his character. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of emotion, and honestly, it's a step up from a lot of Hallmark movies. To number 10, which is Venom 2: Let There Be Carnage. And the only reason why I saw this movie at all was because my brother wanted to see the end credit scene on the big screen. So we heard the news about the end credit scene. I think it even got leaked on YouTube. We're like, oh, that's cool. Let's watch it. And so we went to the theaters, and I haven't even seen Venom 1, to be honest. But I saw this movie. Again, I appreciate that this movie is short. It's only like 90 minutes long, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I had a good time. There's a lot of I liked. It was just a fun movie, a fun little jaunt. It's not good. I mean, it's not like an amazing movie, but it's like, yeah, it's fun. If it were any longer, I think it would probably be quite a bit lower on this list. But it was fun. There was a lot of sequences that I really enjoyed, especially with Carnage. I'm a big fan of Woody Harrelson, and I feel like this movie was better than it should have been, at least. Just a good fun time. But one thing I will say was that the movie theater we go to is like one of those really fancy, like prestige movie theaters. So you have the recliners and they're heated and all that. Unfortunately, the sound and the screen are also bigger and louder. So one of the characters in this movie, her power is that she screams, and they didn't bother to adjust that. So we're in this movie theater with these loudspeakers, and every time she screams, you can like feel it. Um, so that kind of sucked, but I enjoyed this movie, I think. Number 9 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This is better. This is like quite a lot better than I thought it would be. Again, I was impressed by this. The fight scenes, like, oh my god, like, a huge problem I have with the MCU is that you can never tell what's going on in a fight. Like, just for example, go watch the opening scene of Falcon and the Winter Soldier and try to explain to me what the hell is going on. I don't know. But in this, the fight choreography is so smooth, and you can tell what's happening. It's so cool. I also really like a lot of the elements of the Eastern mysticism that they incorporated. I thought that was really cool. I love that there are dragons in this movie. I'm not like ahead of time. I don't think I would have been like, oh, not really a huge fan of dragons, but like these dragons are cool though. So that's fun. Again, like I love a lot of the lead characters. I love the villain. I believe his name's Wen Wu. I like the two main characters, Katie and Shang-Chi. They're both very charming, very likable. I'm really curious to see where they go from here. But yeah, quite a bit. I was impressed with this movie quite a lot. Number 8 is Malignant. Then there's not a whole lot I can say about this movie because literally, when it comes to spoilers, I don't really care all that much about like if I'm spoiled or not. This level of surprise doesn't necessarily, for me at least, correlate with the level of enjoyment with the movie. But we back in the summertime, Mike, the other person who runs this channel, he sent me a message. He says, "Have you seen Malignant? It's one of the most unique horror movies I've ever seen." Like, oh sure, I'll watch Malignant. It's on HBO. Yeah, I'll check it out. And I hadn't seen any of the trailers just because I wasn't even interested in this movie. I hadn't checked out any of the trailers, so I didn't know what it was about. And so I just kind of popped it on, and I was like, oh my god, this is wild. Directed by James Wan, so it's shot really well. This story is just insane. Like, if you're interested in seeing this movie at all, just don't watch any of the trailers. Just go see it. It's wild, man. So I will say that some people thought it was a little bit too silly, almost. It's how insane it gets, and I can understand that. But if you have a certain level of disbelief, I think that you would enjoy this movie quite a bit. Number 7 is Ghostbusters Afterlife. I'm a big fan of the original Ghostbusters. Unfortunately, Ghostbusters 2 and the 2016 film I'm pretty indifferent about. And so I was like, I want this movie to be good. And I feel like it's better than those two, but I don't think it's quite as good as the first one. And honestly, the more time I think about it, I'm like, I'm not sure if it was actually as good as I initially thought. I'm going to have to watch it again. But the cast, really good cast. I like, without spoiling anything, I like the new team, the new characters that become the Ghostbusters, the new Ghostbusters. I enjoy that quite a lot. I enjoy that team dynamic. One thing I do like about a movie is I love a good team dynamic. We'll get into this actually in number 6. I'll talk about this a little bit more. But when there's a team and they have good chemistry with each other, I love that a lot. This movie has that. The thing that I don't like about it as much is that a lot of the monsters are just recycled from the previous movies, and it doesn't really have a lot in way of new monsters or like ghosts or creatures. And I was hoping for more of that. So if you've seen other Ghostbusters movies, there's nothing here that's gonna like shock you. Um, but yeah, it was a nice, charming little movie. I'm hoping that if we get a sequel, it'll be a little bit more. I don't want to say risky, but a little bit more. Um, They don't play it as safe as with this one. It's a very safe movie. Um, Number 6 is The King's Man. Again, this is one of the ones I was talking about where it's not a lot of people like this movie because they say like, oh, it was written poorly. It's the jokes don't land. The cinematography wasn't very good. I don't really care about any of that. Well, I do, but it doesn't necessarily affect how I look at a movie. It could, but it doesn't necessarily. Um, I just really love the it's well, first of all, it's a war movie. I'm sucker for a good war movie. Um, I enjoyed this movie quite a lot. I enjoyed the main cast. There's about four. Well, I'd say the main three cast. I'm gonna have them up on screen because I don't remember their names. But the three of them are really good. There's a couple of other people that are part of that kind of come and go as this team as as the movie progresses. But the team basically consists of these main three characters. They're all really good, and their chemistry with each other is really good. Unfortunately, the villain in this movie was not as interesting as the villain in the other Kingsman movies. And on that, I'll actually talk about it as a franchise. This movie is quite a bit different than the other ones. It's more serious. It's not as humorous, but there are a lot of callbacks to the rest of the franchise. So on one hand, you're like, this movie could be very alienating to fans of the other movies, but at the same time, if you're a fan, there's a lot of callbacks. So, there's a little bit of give and take. I will say with Matthew Vaughn, the directing this movie, the fighting is incredible. Um, I don't know, yeah, a lot of the acting is very good. I would have liked to have a bigger role from Aaron Taylor Johnson. I'm a huge fan of his, but he's only in this movie a little bit. I would like to see more of him. If this movie ever gets a sequel, which I hope it does, I would like to see more of him in the sequel. And on that note, if you haven't seen it yet, there's an end credit scene that teases something that I really, really would like to see. So everyone go watch this movie. Make sure it earns a lot of money so we can get that Kingsman Part 2. That sounds really cool. 5. This movie is a lot of people's number ones. And it is Spider-Man No Way Home. I enjoyed it quite a lot. Going into this movie, I mentioned this in my spoiler-free review. It's like a lot of the promotional material and a lot of the leaks were revolving around, oh, this character's going to come back, this character's going to come back. I was like, is that all this movie is? It's just a bunch of familiar faces. Oh, you like this character from this other movie? Here he is. You like this character from here? Bring him back. It's like, is that all it's going to be? Because if that's it, I'm not even interested. So I came into this movie with kind of low expectations because I was like, it's just going to be a who's who of characters we've seen before. And it is that. There's a lot of that, actually, in this movie. But it's more than that. It's a lot of fun, honestly. I'm not as invested as some people. Some people were crying. It's like, oh, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen. I enjoyed it quite a lot. Like I have a whole spoiler-free review on the channel if you want to check it out. But I enjoyed it quite a lot. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I didn't get sucked up into the hype. Honestly, I wish that this movie was a little bit less hyped because basically the second half of 2021 there was a lot of good movies that came out that were worth discussing, but like Spider-Man just trampled all of them. And so I'm kind of a little bitter towards this movie because like, yeah, Spider-Man was cool, but what about this other thing? What about these other movies? Nobody cares about any of those other movies. I just want to talk about Spider-Man. So yeah, it's a good movie. I don't think I didn't enjoy it as much as other people did, but it's number 5 on my list. So I did enjoy it quite a lot. Number 4, and I believe this is my favorite comic book movie of the year, is the Suicide Squad, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. And the reason why this is my favorite movie of the year is because it just, like, the tone of this movie, like, is, like, perfect for me. Like, it's this crazy violence, but it's also, like, really, like, satirical, cynical comedy. But it's basically James Gunn at his finest. I really like it. It's, like, the perfect... James Gunn understands the assignment, and he takes what few elements were good about the original Suicide Squad, and he incorporates them into this and kind of borrows things from the comics. And if you've seen any other James Gunn movie and you liked it, then this is like the James Gunn movie. The acting's great, the story's great. What I like about this movie is that you don't really know who's gonna die. That's something that's really interesting, something really fun to watch on your first viewing, is like, okay, who's gonna die? Because you really don't know. You think, oh, these characters are safe. They're not. A lot of the safe characters, you think they die. So it's really, really exciting the first time through. Because you're like, oh, who's gonna survive? But yeah, that's like, it's basically kind of like a war movie almost, but not like the way you think it is. That's all I'll say about that movie. Number 3, this is another movie that was very low budget, very indie, very shoestring, as the saying goes. But Black Friday. I love this movie, man. This is another Bruce Campbell movie. I think he produced it. Devon Sawa's in it. This is like an independent horror movie. It's a B-movie horror movie. So like it's like cheesy on purpose, but at the same time, it's like so much fun. Like I really, really enjoyed this movie. It's like everything that I want. I love like cheesy monsters. I love crazy like practical effects, not visual effects, not CGI. I'm talking about like prosthetics and like weird blood and makeup and stuff. I love that so much. But yeah, so basically this is Bruce Campbell is a general manager of a toy store on Black Friday. And on Black Friday, the world gets invaded by aliens at the same time. So he's running this store with his employees, and the customers start to get sick, and they realize this isn't normal, and so they have to defend against an alien invasion. It is so much fun, and going in, I was kind of scared that Bruce Campbell would die, like early on in the movie, because he's getting old, and he can't really do all the things he could do, like in the 80s. So I was like, oh, please just have Bruce Campbell have some good moments, and he does. He does have a lot of really, really good moments, and so if you're a fan of cheesy horror movies, you like a holiday movie, maybe a bit of both, I highly recommend you watch this movie, Black Friday. Number 2, and this was another one that was surprising to me, was Last Night in Soho. So, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Edgar Wright. I feel like visually and the sound design are usually really good in his movies, but the story and characters, things that I care about when coming into a movie, they're usually lacking. Like, Baby Driver is technically an impressive movie, but the story and the characters are severely lacking. That's why my favorite Edgar Wright movie is Scott Pilgrim, because the story for that already existed. It was based on a comic book, and so from there he was able to kind of springboard off of that story and kind of make his own movie with that. But this Last Night in Soho is an entirely original story, which is why it's so much more impressive, because it's actually a really good story in my opinion. Some people think it falls apart towards the end. I don't care. I enjoyed it all the way through. But yeah, it's like trippy, it's like psychedelic, it's a bit of horror in there, which I love. It's really cool. I'm not even trying to explain it. It's like a mystery where this girl can see ghosts. She has a bit of ESP sort of thing, and she sees a murder that happens, and so she kind of tries to investigate it in the present day, but she's also having flashbacks from a life of a previous person in the 60s. And I can't really get into it, but it's really cool to watch. And so that's why it's number 2 on my list. After I saw that, I was like, there's no movie that comes out this year that's going to be better than Last Night in Soho, right? Wrong. This movie, number 1, was one I was anticipating quite a bit, but I didn't think it was going to be any better than Last Night in Soho, but it ended up being quite a bit better than Last Night in Soho. And my number one pick for best movie of the year, 2021, is West Side Story. I'm a pretty big fan of the original film. I'm a big fan of Steven Spielberg. And so I was like, okay, this is probably going to be good, but I didn't think it was going to be that good. Honestly, people are saying that this is like the quintessential, this is like the best version of West Side Story ever. I haven't seen any of the Broadway. I've only seen the two movies, but like this movie is really good. I haven't seen the first one in a while. I enjoy it quite a bit, but I haven't seen it in a while. But this movie is like it's better in some regards. It's like it has a bit of grit. It's kind of a gritty crime movie. Well, it also has that. It manages to capture the same spark of like the cool, like fun energy that was in the first movie. It manages to capture that while also being like this gritty movie about 1950s New York. It is so cool. And if you don't know, if you haven't heard, don't know the story of West Side Story, I'm not going to describe it, but having known what happens, somehow that didn't make it any easier, especially during the end. It hits just as hard. Knowing what was happening, like the surprise, like I knew it was happening. I've seen the movie before, the original movie before, but in this context, I was like, I know it was going to happen, and somehow I still get sucked into it, and like on the edge of my seat, and it's a damn good movie. Unfortunately, nobody saw it, so I recommend it. Even if you're not into musicals, I still think you're going to enjoy this movie. It has a lot of heart, it has a lot of charm, there's a lot of emotions going on. But yeah, that is my list. Comment down below with what your favorite movie was. What was your most surprising, disappointing movie of the year? What was a movie you didn't think was going to be good but turned out to be good? Comment down below with your thoughts on that. You can check the links in the description for our Facebook, Instagram, social media, and Patreon if you want to contribute to what we do here on this channel. Thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. I will see you next time, sometime in the next month. There's a couple of videos that I have ideas for. I'm not sure if I'm ever going to get around to it, but hopefully I will. And then subscribe so you don't miss out on those. I'll see you next time. Peace.